Welcome, night owls, to 2-Hour Horror Stories. I'm your host for the next 2 chilling hours. These aren't just bedtime stories, they're terrifying. Subscribe if you dare, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, silence your phone, close your eyes, and let the horror in. The mirror had always been a fixture in the old apartment. It hung in the narrow hallway, tall and narrow itself, its ornate wooden frame worn from decades of use. At first, it was just a piece of furniture, something to check your reflection before leaving the house. But soon, it became something else entirely. It started one night when the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the city outside. She was getting ready for bed, brushing her hair in front of the mirror. The reflection was normal at first, until she noticed her breath fogging the glass. That was strange. The room was warm and the windows were shut tight. Yet, as she exhaled, a small, slow cloud formed on the mirror's surface. She leaned in closer. The mist didn't fade away like it normally would on glass. Instead, it lingered, growing thicker in one particular spot. It was as if something was breathing right behind the mirror, pushing against it with invisible lungs. Her heart quickened, but she shook off the feeling, blaming it on exhaustion. The next morning, the fog was gone, but the unease lingered. Days passed, and every night when she came home late, the mirror's surface would fog up again. Slowly, deliberately, despite the warmth of the room. The breath was always there, steady, as if someone unseen stood just beyond the glass. One evening, curiosity won over fear. She pressed her palm against the mirror's cool surface, tracing the shape of the foggy patch. It felt colder than the rest of the mirror, almost unnaturally so. She wiped the condensation away, but it returned immediately, this time swirling in patterns that resembled shallow breaths or quiet whispers pressed against the glass. That night, the air in the apartment grew thick and heavy. She woke to the faint sound of breathing, soft, rhythmic, not her own. The mirror's surface was fogged as if someone had been standing there, breathing heavily right in front of it. But when she reached for the light switch, the room remained dark. The power was out. She fumbled toward the mirror with her phone flashlight. The beam caught the fogged glass, revealing something she hadn't seen before. Faint impressions. Fingerprints pressed into the mist, as if someone's hand had been there moments ago. Invisible but tangible. Panic rose in her chest. The breathing grew louder, closer. It wasn't coming from the hallway, but from the mirror itself. A cold presence pressed just beyond the glass, invisible yet undeniably real. She stumbled back, heart pounding, but the mirror seemed to draw her in, pulling her gaze deeper into its shadowy depths. For nights after, the breathing never ceased, sometimes slow and steady, other times ragged and desperate. And always the fog, always the fingerprints. It was as if the mirror trapped someone, or something, breathing behind its surface, desperate to be heard. She told a friend, hoping for some explanation. They joked about haunted mirrors, reflections from another world, or a trapped spirit. But no one had answers. No one could explain the suffocating feeling that crept over her every time she passed the hallway. One night, the fog changed shape, no longer random. It formed a face, blurred but unmistakable, eyes wide and hollow, mouth opening in a silent scream. The face lingered for a moment before fading into the glass. She felt a sudden chill rush through her body, as if the mirror had reached out and touched her soul. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the breathing echoed in her ears, even when she left the apartment. The mirror had claimed her attention, binding her in its cold grasp. She found herself talking to it, asking what it wanted, why it was trapped behind the glass. No answer came, only the breath. One evening, in a moment of reckless desperation, She took a shard of broken glass from an old picture frame and struck the mirror's surface. The glass cracked sharply, spiderwebbing across the surface. The breathing stopped immediately, replaced by a long, low wail that seemed to vibrate in her bones. But the mirror did not shatter. Instead, the crack pulsed with a dark glow, as if the wound had opened a door she could not close. Through the fractured glass, she saw not her reflection, but a dimly lit room filled with shadows. Shapes moved just beyond reach, and the breathing was louder than ever, ragged and pleading. Terrified, she tried to step away, but found her feet rooted to the spot. The mirror's surface rippled like water, drawing her in with an irresistible pull. For a moment, she felt herself slipping forward, sucked into the depths of the glass world. Then, as if released from a spell, she stumbled backward, heart hammering, breath ragged. The mirror went dark, its surface smooth and silent as before. But the feeling remained, that something had been close enough to touch her. After that night, the mirror stopped breathing. The fog no longer appeared, and the fingerprints vanished. Yet the sense of being watched never left. She began to notice small things. Objects slightly moved, the faintest whisper in the quiet, shadows that lingered longer than natural. And sometimes, in the darkest moments before sleep, she could swear she heard a soft breath beside her. A presence waiting behind the glass, patient and watching, still trapped but no longer silent. The mirror remained, a silent sentinel in the hallway, waiting for the next breath, the next touch, the next soul to draw too close. Whispering shadows never meant to be heard. But at midnight, when the world slumbers and silence deepens, even shadows dare to speak. It began with a whisper soft, almost inaudible, like a breath carried on a breeze that wasn't there. Alone in her apartment, Mara sat by the window, the moonlight casting long, thin shadows across the walls. She thought it was the wind playing tricks on the old wooden frame, or maybe the hum of the city life fading into the night. But the whisper came again, this time closer. It didn't belong to the wind. It wasn't the city. It was something else, something waiting. The shadows danced, stretching, twisting unnaturally along the cracked paint of her walls. And in those whispers, Mara thought she heard her name. At first, she told herself it was her imagination, a tired mind creating stories from the quiet. But every night, as the clock struck midnight, the whispers returned. Never louder, but always clearer. They weren't random sounds. They were voices, speaking in riddles, murmurs that scraped her sanity like fingernails on a chalkboard. She tried recording them. The microphone picked up nothing but silence. The whispers seemed to exist between the seconds, in a frequency too faint for machines. But Mara's ears could hear, and so could the neighbors once. Late one night, a neighbor knocked on her door, eyes wide with terror. They spoke of whispers coming through the walls, voices that weren't there before, promising secrets in exchange for silence. They begged Mara to leave the apartment, warning her of the darkness that grew when the shadows whispered. But Mara was drawn in deeper. The voices promised knowledge, truths hidden beneath the mundane, answers to questions she hadn't dared ask. The shadow whispers became clearer, weaving stories of forgotten histories, of pain buried in the foundations of the city. They spoke of lives erased, of bargains made in desperation. One midnight, the whispers revealed a name Mara had never heard, but which stirred something deep in her memory. The voice was cold, emotionless, but insistent. It urged her to find an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town, where the shadows were said to gather. Curiosity and fear warred within her, but the pull of the unknown was too strong. Mara went, guided by the faint echo of the whispering shadows. The house was decrepit, swallowed by vines and shadow, as if the night itself was reluctant to let it go. As she crossed the threshold, the air thickened, and the whispering rose to a chorus. Voices overlapping, pleading, laughing, warning. Inside, Mara found a mirror covered in dust, framed with carvings of faces frozen in silent screams. As she wiped the glass clean, the shadows behind her thickened, curling around the room like smoke. The whispers crescendoed into a single chilling phrase, "Look beyond." Her reflection rippled, distorting until the glass showed a different scene. A dark room, a figure standing still, watching. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, filled with a cold hunger. Mara felt a presence behind her, the air growing icy. Turning slowly, she found nothing, but the whispers grew louder, surrounding her like a storm. The shadows lengthened and reached for her, curling like fingers, brushing cold against her skin. The mirror began to crack, spiderweb fractures spreading rapidly. In the fractured reflections, Mara saw glimpses of other faces, lost souls trapped between light and dark, whispering their stories, begging for release. A voice broke through the chaos, soft but commanding. "The shadows hold the forgotten. Speak for us, or be one with us." Mara's breath caught. She realized the whispers weren't random. The night was unusually silent, the kind of silence that presses in on you until even the smallest sound feels magnified. Every breath, every distant creak became impossible to ignore. The clock on the wall ticked away slowly, marking the hours that no one seemed to want to count. She sat curled up on the couch, the glow from her phone barely illuminating the dim living room. The TV had long been off, and she wasn't reading or scrolling anymore. Just sitting, listening, waiting for sleep to arrive. But it never did. Outside the large bay window, the yard was cloaked in darkness, except for the faint gleam of the streetlight a few houses down. Her eyes drifted to the glass, where her own reflection stared back, distorted and strange in the faint moonlight. Suddenly, a sharp, deliberate knock broke the silence. A single tap, soft but unmistakable. Her heart jumped. The sound seemed to come from outside, at the window just inches from her face. She froze, unsure if she had imagined it, until the knock came again. This time twice, slow and rhythmic. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Was it a prank? Someone looking for help? Or something else entirely? The street was empty. No footsteps approached the house. No flicker of movement passed beneath the dim light outside. The knock came again, more urgent now, 3 short taps. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to tell herself it was just a branch or a bird, but the timing was too precise, the sound too deliberate. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she slowly reached for the curtains, fingers trembling. Pulling the fabric back just enough, she peered out. Nothing, just the empty yard bathed in shadows. The knock came once more, this time from the window on the side, where the small kitchen light sometimes stayed on until late. But that window faced the dark side of the house. No street, no path, just darkness. She blinked, heart hammering, and stepped cautiously toward the kitchen. Every creak of the floorboards felt amplified, every whisper of wind like a warning. As she reached the window, the knock came again, louder, more insistent. Her hand reached out to the cold glass, half expecting to see something impossible. But the pane was empty. A flicker of movement caught her eye in the corner of the yard, a shadow darting just beyond the reach of the streetlight. The knock returned, this time rapid, almost frantic. She stepped back quickly. Her mind raced. Who could be out there, knocking at the window in the dead of night with no one answering? A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, and the curtain billowed as if something had just slipped away. Her phone buzzed, breaking the tension. A message from an unknown number. "Let me in." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the screen, unable to look away. Another message arrived. "Please, it's cold out here." The knocking stopped. For a moment, everything was still. Too still. Then, a faint sound, soft breathing, barely audible, right outside the window. She pressed her back against the wall, heart pounding like a drum in her ears. The cold breath fogged the glass, as if someone was right there, watching her through the darkness. She wanted to scream, to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The breathing grew louder, more labored. Suddenly, a handprint appeared on the outside of the glass, pale, wet, and trembling. She stared at it in disbelief, unable to move. The hand slowly slid downward, leaving a trail of mist as if the person or thing outside was dragging their fingers down the window. Then, as quickly as it had come, the hand vanished. A voice whispered, barely audible but chilling, "Open up." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the lock. The door to the kitchen creaked behind her. She spun around. No one was there. The knocking resumed, but this time from inside the house. From the living room, she backed away, heart racing, realizing with horror that she had locked every door and window. The knock was coming from inside. The room was suddenly cold, the air thick with something unseen. Her eyes darted around, searching for the source of the knock, but found only shadows. Then, the power flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. The knocking continued, now slow and deliberate, echoing through the empty house. Her phone's flashlight barely cut through the black as she crept toward the living room. The knock stopped the moment she entered. Only silence remained. But then, from the corner of the room, a whisper drifted in the dark. "You let me in." Her breath caught, and the flashlight flickered again. The room was empty. Or was it? A faint outline appeared on the wall. A figure, standing just beyond the light, watching. She blinked. It was gone. A sudden cold rush swept past her, like a gust of icy wind that carried the faint scent of something old, forgotten. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. "Thanks for letting me in." The screen went dark, and so did the house. No one ever saw her again. But sometimes, late at night, neighbors swear they hear a knock, tapping softly on their windows, waiting, watching, wanting in. There was a house at the edge of town, long abandoned, with peeling paint and windows clouded by decades of dust. But the attic window was different. It always seemed cleaner, almost as if it was watching. A young woman named Claire moved into the house one chilly autumn afternoon. She was drawn by its cheap rent and quiet location, perfect for the writing retreat she desperately needed. The locals warned her not to stay in the house past sunset, whispering about strange noises and shadows moving in the attic. Claire, ever the skeptic, laughed off the stories. The first few nights passed without incident, the silence of the old house oddly comforting. But on the fourth night, as the clock struck midnight, faint sounds began to seep through the ceiling. The soft creak of floorboards, a muted thump, then a slow, rhythmic tapping. It was coming from the attic above her bedroom. She told herself it was the house settling, or perhaps a stray animal trapped somewhere. But the noises persisted, growing clearer each night. They weren't random, they seemed deliberate, almost like a pattern. Driven by curiosity and a writer's instinct to uncover a story, Claire decided to investigate. The attic stairs groaned under her weight as she ascended, her flashlight beam piercing the darkness. The air grew colder, heavier. At the attic door, the tapping stopped. She hesitated before pushing it open. Inside, The attic was cluttered with forgotten furniture, dusty trunks, and cobwebs draped like ghostly veils. But the silence was oppressive. Then, she heard it again. A faint whisper, almost inaudible, as if the attic itself was breathing secrets. She moved deeper inside and spotted an old trunk, its lock rusted but unsealed. With trembling hands, Claire lifted the lid. Inside lay a collection of yellowed letters and brittle photographs. The letters spoke of a woman named Eleanor, who once lived in the house nearly a century ago. They told a story of loneliness and despair, of a life slowly unraveling in isolation. But one letter stood apart. It was unfinished, the ink smeared, as if interrupted by something urgent. It spoke of a presence in the attic, a whisper that promised escape, but at a terrible cost. Suddenly, the attic grew darker, the flashlight flickering. Claire's breath quickened. From the shadows, a cold draft curled around her neck like icy fingers. The whispers rose into a chorus, echoes of Eleanor's sorrow and rage. She dropped the letters and fled down the stairs, the tapping now pounding like a heartbeat chasing her. The front door slammed shut as she burst into the night air, gasping. The next morning, the house was silent again. The attic window once more mysteriously clean, watching. But Claire never returned. And late at night, neighbors say, you can still hear echoes from the attic. A tapping, a whisper, a plea for release that will never come. The streetlight outside had always been a steady glow, a small beacon on the quiet suburban road where everything else felt still, almost frozen in time. On every dark night, it cast a circle of pale light over the cracked sidewalk, faintly illuminating the towering oaks that lined the street. It was nothing special, just a streetlight, until one night, it vanished. No, not just went out. It disappeared. One evening, a young man named Alex was walking home after a late shift. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that swallowed stars whole and made everything feel claustrophobic. As he reached the corner where the streetlight usually stood, he noticed something was wrong. The soft, familiar glow was missing. Instead, the entire lamppost appeared to be gone, as if it had been erased from the earth. Confused, Alex stopped and looked around. The sidewalk was empty, the street silent except for the distant hum of passing cars. No flickering, no buzzing, just nothing where the streetlight should have been. His mind raced. Had it been removed for repairs? He hadn't seen any trucks or workers. No warning signs. He took a few cautious steps forward. The darkness felt different here, thicker, almost like a living thing pressing in on him. The surrounding shadows seemed to twitch, stretch, and warp just beyond the edge of his vision. A cold shiver ran down his spine. As Alex's eyes adjusted, he noticed something else. The trees near the missing streetlight weren't casting shadows. Instead, they looked blurred, like smudges on a dirty window. The usual shapes and textures were twisted, as if reality itself was bending at that spot. He rubbed his eyes. When he looked again, the streetlight was still gone. It was impossible. A solid metal pole, wired into the ground, just vanished. He crouched down to examine the spot where it should have been, but the concrete looked normal. No holes, no signs of recent disturbance. Just an unbroken slab of pavement under the night sky. His phone buzzed. A message from his sister. Did you see the lights out on Elm? Weird, right? He typed back quickly. It's not out. It's gone. Like vanished. No reply. Alex felt an uneasy weight settle over him. Something about the spot didn't add up. He tried to shake off the creeping dread and hurried home. That night, sleep was elusive. His dreams were fractured, filled with static whispers he couldn't catch, and flashes of something pale moving just beyond his peripheral vision. He woke several times to the feeling of being watched, even though his apartment was locked tight and silent. The next evening, curiosity drew Alex back to the streetlight's location. The air was colder now, and the street looked unfamiliar. The trees were longer, their branches clawing into the sky like skeletal fingers. As he approached the spot, he felt it again, that unnatural pressure, like the darkness was alive and holding its breath. Then, without warning, the streetlight reappeared. Not fully, more like a flicker, an outline of where it once stood, shimmering like a mirage. The pale light it cast was weak, wavering between visible and invisible. Alex stepped closer, heart pounding. His skin prickled. The edges of the light were jagged, almost digital, like a glitch in the fabric of the world. Suddenly, from within that flickering glow, something shifted. A face. At first, it was just a shadow, a vague shape, but it sharpened quickly. An expression twisted in pain and fear, eyes wide and unblinking. It was trapped behind the fractured light, pressing out as if begging for release. Alex staggered back, breathing hard. The face vanished. The streetlight went dark again. Shaken, he pulled out his phone to record the spot, but the screen showed only static where the streetlight should be. Over the next week, Alex became obsessed. Every night, he returned to that corner. Each time the streetlight flickered back into existence, the face returned. Sometimes clearer, sometimes distorted. Sometimes the face appeared older, sometimes younger, but always haunted. He showed videos to friends, but their phones showed only a normal empty street with a perfectly working streetlight. No flickering, no face. Alex's reality began to fracture. He started hearing footsteps behind him when no one was there. Doors slammed shut on their own. The line between his waking life and nightmares blurred. One night, desperate for answers, he researched local legends and old news reports about that street. He found a story about a man who disappeared in that very spot 50 years ago. The details were vague, no cause, no body ever found. Only witnesses reported seeing him vanish into the darkness as the streetlight flickered out. The story called it the vanishing streetlight phenomenon, an unexplained event where the light disappears and strange sightings follow. Some said the streetlight was a threshold, a barrier between worlds, and when it flickered or vanished, something crossed over. Alex realized that the face he saw was the missing man, trapped in a liminal space where time and reality tangled. The flickering streetlight was not just broken, it was a prison, a crack in existence. On his last visit, Alex stayed until dawn. He waited, heart hammering, eyes fixed on the dark spot. The streetlight vanished again, and the face appeared, clearer than ever. But this time it smiled, and reached out. Before Alex could react, the cold darkness surged forward and pulled him into the flickering void. His phone was found days later at the corner, screen cracked but still recording. The footage showed Alex's terrified face, the streetlight flickering wildly. Then, nothing but static. Now, the streetlight stands on Elm Street again, glowing steadily each night. But some say if you stand under it just after midnight, you can hear faint whispers, like desperate voices trapped between flickers of light and shadow, waiting for the night to claim another lost soul. The lullaby was the first sign. At first, it was faint, barely more than a whisper drifting through the stale air of a cramped apartment. She thought it was the wind playing tricks, or maybe the thin walls carrying sounds from the neighbors. But the melody was too clear, too deliberate to be random. It was soft and haunting, a gentle tune like a mother's lullaby sung long ago, but twisted somehow. Each night, as the clock crept closer to midnight, the lullaby returned. It wrapped around the silence, threading through shadows, winding its way into the corners of her mind. She had never heard the song before, but it was familiar, an echo from some distant memory, a fragment of forgotten childhood dreams. The notes were delicate, yet they carried an undertone of sorrow, as if the singer was lost between worlds. At first, she tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was just her imagination. But the song grew louder, insistent, each repetition stretching longer, more vivid. It seemed to seep from the walls themselves, a sound that could not be pinned down or escaped. One night, she woke to find the lullaby playing again, but this time it was accompanied by the faintest glimpse of movement in the dark, something just beyond the edge of the lamp's glow. She strained her eyes, but saw only the shifting shadows, alive and restless. The feeling was unmistakable. She was being watched. Unable to bear the growing dread, she began to research the history of her apartment building. What she found was chilling. Decades ago, a young mother had lived in the same unit, her infant child mysteriously disappearing without a trace. Locals whispered of a curse, a sorrow that lingered like a stain, carried in the walls and floors. The lullaby was said to be the mother's last song, sung for a child lost to the night. Some claimed the song was a warning. Others believed it was a call, beckoning those who heard it toward an unknown fate. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, she recorded the lullaby on her phone one night. When she played it back, the melody seemed distorted, warped. A voice beneath the tune, whispering words she couldn't quite understand. It was as if the lullaby was layered with a secret message, hidden beneath the notes. The more she listened, the more she felt a presence growing near her, something cold and ancient. Her dreams became haunted by a crying baby and a woman's broken song. The boundary between sleep and waking blurred, and sometimes she found herself humming the lullaby without realizing it. One evening, she followed the sound through the darkened hallways, the lullaby guiding her steps like a thread through a labyrinth. It led her to the basement, a place she had always avoided. The air grew heavy, thick with dust and forgotten memories. At the far end of the basement, behind a cracked wooden door, the lullaby reached its crescendo. She pushed the door open and found an old cradle, empty but for a faded blanket. The song stopped abruptly. In the silence, she felt the weight of grief pressing down on her chest, a sorrow so profound it seemed to seep from the very walls. And then she heard it, the softest breath, a tiny sigh from the darkness. The cradle rocked gently, as if moved by an unseen hand. She stepped back, heart pounding, as the lullaby whispered again. This time a little louder, a little closer. The melody was no longer just a song. It was a presence, a story trapped in time, reaching out from the shadows to be heard. She realized then that the lullaby wasn't just haunted by a lost child, but by the memory of a love so deep it refused to fade. And somewhere beyond the veil of night, the song continued, waiting for someone to listen. They say mirrors don't lie, but sometimes what they show isn't the truth, or at least not your truth. It started with a small crack in the bathroom mirror. Emily first noticed it one restless night when the moonlight sliced through her window like a blade. The crack wasn't new, but what caught her attention was the way the reflection in that fractured section seemed off, like it belonged to someone else entirely. She blinked, leaned closer. Her own tired eyes stared back, but something was wrong. The eyes in the mirror lingered too long, too heavy with a sadness Emily didn't feel. The mouth turned up in a faint, almost cruel smile that didn't match her own tense expression. Shaking her head, she stepped back. Maybe she was too tired, or her mind was playing tricks. But over the next few nights, the reflection grew more distinct, more alive. One evening, the electricity flickered just as she brushed her teeth. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and for a fleeting moment, a figure appeared behind her reflection. Not in the room itself, but in the mirror. A silhouette with hollow eyes and a face half shrouded in darkness. It vanished before Emily could turn around. Sleep became elusive after that. Each time she looked into the mirror, the reflection subtly changed. Sometimes her reflection's movements lagged, as if it was watching her rather than copying her. At other moments, the reflection would blink slowly, deliberately, when she hadn't. Emily tried covering the mirror, but it felt wrong, like hiding something from herself. She researched mirrors and folklore, uncovering tales of trapped souls and gateways between worlds. Stories of doppelgangers and mirror demons who could slip through cracks in glass to steal a life. One night, she set up her phone to record herself brushing her hair in front of the mirror. She wanted proof, something tangible. The video showed the usual reflection, until the last seconds. There, just before the recording ended, her mirrored self's eyes went black, and a whisper echoed faintly, barely audible. "Let me out." Panic surged through her veins. What was this entity? A trapped spirit? A dark reflection? Or something darker? The line between Emily and her mirror self blurred. She began catching glimpses in reflective surfaces all around her. Windows, spoons, even her phone screen. Each reflection was a little less like her and a little more like the figure from the cracked mirror. The most terrifying moment came when Emily realized her reflection was no longer copying her movements perfectly. It hesitated before moving, sometimes smiling when she frowned, and once, for a horrifying second, it didn't move at all. It simply watched. One night, drawn to the mirror, Emily reached out to touch her reflection. As her fingertips brushed the glass, a coldness seeped into her skin, unlike anything she had felt before. The reflection's hand pressed back, but instead of the smooth glass barrier, it felt wet, almost like reaching through water. Her reflection's lips parted, whispering again, "Swap." The next day, Emily's friends began to notice strange things. She would stare blankly into space, her eyes glazed, and her voice took on a slower, hollow tone. Sometimes, she would flinch as if hearing unseen voices. One evening, she caught a glimpse of herself in a hallway mirror and froze. Her reflection smirked back, clearly alive, clearly separate. The real Emily felt trapped inside her own body, a prisoner of the reflection's growing influence. Desperation pushed her to break the mirror. She grabbed a heavy object and smashed it. Glass shards scattered, but as the largest piece crashed to the floor, a low growl echoed from the broken surface. The shards shimmered and began to rearrange, reassembling the fractured mirror in front of her eyes. From the depths of the newly whole mirror, a dark hand emerged, cold and solid. It grasped Emily's wrist with an impossible strength. The room grew icy, and the shadows deepened as the reflection pulled. Emily screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. She struggled, but the reflection was relentless, dragging her closer to the glass world. In a blink, her body slumped to the floor, lifeless and pale. Behind the glass, a figure now stood where her reflection had been. The real Emily, trapped and silent, staring out with wide, terrified eyes. The reflection had taken her place, smiling cruelly as it blinked slowly and whispered, "Now I live." No one would see Emily again, but if you pass by her old apartment, sometimes you can see her standing behind the window, eyes hollow, waiting, her face a cracked reflection of the woman she once was. And if you dare look in the mirror late at night, you might just catch a glimpse of the reflection that isn't yours. Because sometimes the mirror does lie, and sometimes it keeps a secret far darker than you could imagine. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. For months, Everything had seemed normal, until the night she realized she wasn't truly alone. Moving in had been a fresh start. A small, one-bedroom on the edge of the city, perfect for a young woman who just wanted peace after a chaotic year. The landlord had mentioned a roommate situation before, but assured her it was just for the previous tenant. No one else was supposed to be there now. At first, the silence was comforting. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional distant siren, and the soft buzz of streetlights outside were the only sounds. But slowly, little things began to unsettle her. Things that no one else would notice at first glance. The faint thud of footsteps in the hallway, even though she lived on the top floor and no one was supposed to be visiting. The soft creak of the floorboards in the living room when no one was there. She told herself it was the building settling, the house shifting under the weight of age. It was nothing, just her imagination, until the night she heard the whisper. It wasn't loud, just a breath of a sound, a soft murmur that seemed to slip through the crack beneath the bedroom door. She froze, listening. The whisper didn't form words, but it was there, a low, almost unintelligible murmur like a secret shared in the dark. She cracked the door open, heart pounding, but the hallway was empty. No shadow, no flicker of movement. The silence swallowed everything whole again. The next day, she told a friend, laughing nervously. "Maybe it's just the old pipes," she said. But the doubt had already taken root. Nights grew harder. The whispers came back, sometimes accompanied by the sound of a chair scraping across the floor or the faint shuffle of someone pacing. She began to notice the little things moving. A misplaced book on the shelf, the TV remote flipped upside down, her keys no longer where she left them. Always subtle, never blatant. She started locking her bedroom door, the key rattling in the lock. But even then, the sounds didn't stop. The footsteps sometimes moved right outside her door. And once, in the dead of night, she swore she heard breathing. Not her own, deeper, heavier, steady. Her sleep became fragmented, dreams tinged with shadows and unexplainable dread. She dreamed of a figure sitting silently in the corner of her room, tall, dark, watching, always watching. But when she woke, no one was there, only the lingering chill in the air. One evening, determined to find answers, she set up her phone to record audio while she slept. When she woke, she played it back with trembling fingers. For hours, silence. Then, just before dawn, a faint whisper emerged. So faint it was barely audible, but unmistakably there. A soft voice said a single word. "Stay." The word echoed in her mind long after the recording ended. Stay. Stay where? Stay with who? Her phone buzzed with a message notification. Confused, she glanced at the screen. It was from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. She tapped to open it. A black and white image of her bedroom, taken from inside the closet. Her blood ran cold. The closet was locked. She didn't own a key. No one else had a key. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat in the living room, lights on, phone in hand. The apartment felt heavy, oppressive. The silence now felt like a presence, watching, waiting. Hours passed. Then the whisper again, closer this time. Not from the hallway or the bedroom, but from inside the walls themselves. She pressed her ear to the peeling wallpaper. The voice was clearer. It wasn't saying stay anymore. It was repeating her name, softly, over and over. She ran to the closet, hands shaking, yanking at the door. It was locked tight. She tried to remember. Had she locked it? Did she ever keep anything inside? Suddenly, the closet door creaked open, slowly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. She stumbled back. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness inside. Empty. except for one thing, a small, tattered notebook lying on the floor. She picked it up, fingers numb. Opening it, the pages were filled with scribbled notes, dates, times, names, all of them her own. One entry stood out, scrawled in shaky handwriting. They watch me. The silence is never empty. They wait. I'm not alone. The last page was blank except for a single word, written large and messy. Help! Her phone rang suddenly, making her jump. Another unknown number. She didn't answer, but the whispers continued, louder now, filling every corner of the apartment, bleeding through the walls, the floor, the air. And in the silent spaces between, she felt the presence, watching, waiting, never leaving. The roommate was silent, but never gone. Beneath a moonless sky, where the silence is thick enough to swallow sound whole, lies an old forgotten graveyard hidden deep in the woods. Few remember its name, and fewer still dare to venture near after dusk. It's the kind of place where the air feels heavier, and the weight of unseen eyes presses down on your skin. The locals tell stories, whispered warnings of a presence that lingers, a voice that calls from between the stones. Years ago, a man named Thomas moved to a small town on the edge of those woods, seeking peace after a string of personal losses. He had heard the tales but dismissed them as superstition, something meant to scare children and keep wanderers away from the wilderness. Thomas was practical, grounded in facts, and had no patience for ghost stories. One night, driven by restless thoughts, he decided to explore the woods before bedtime. The moon was absent, and the only illumination came from the faint glow of his flashlight. His steps were careful but determined, crunching over dry leaves and broken twigs. As he pushed past the last thicket of trees, the ancient graveyard came into view. The stones were worn, cracked, and scattered in uneven rows. Some were barely standing, leaning against one another like forgotten memories. Vines crept across names that time had tried to erase, and patches of fog curled low over the ground, swirling with the cold breath of the night. The place felt suspended, caught between this world and the next. Thomas's light caught on a particular gravestone near the center, a tall marble slab with an illegible name carved deep into its surface. Something about it drew him closer, though he couldn't say why. The temperature dropped sharply as he approached, and a sudden stillness swallowed the night. No wind, no rustle of leaves, just an oppressive silence that filled his ears. That's when he heard it, a whisper, soft, distant at first, like the rustling of dry grass, but growing clearer with every passing second. It wasn't in any language he recognized. A breathy murmur that felt more like a vibration inside his chest than sound reaching his ears. Thomas froze, heart pounding, eyes scanning the shadows. Thomas? The voice breathed again, barely more than a sigh. His name. The whisper seemed to come from the gravestone itself. A chill ran down his spine as he knelt beside it, fingertips tracing the cold marble. The name slowly revealed itself beneath the moss. Eleanor. No last name.
No dates.
Just one name, fading like a secret. The whisper came again, this time sharper, desperate, as if someone was trapped beneath the earth trying to break free. Help me. He scrambled back, breath shallow, flashlight trembling in his hand. The air thickened, and the fog swirled faster, forming shapes, fleeting shadows that vanished when he tried to focus on them. Something unseen pressed close, like cold fingers grazing his skin. Thomas's rational mind battled panic, telling himself it was just the wind, his imagination fueled by old ghost stories. Yet the whisper persisted, growing louder, clearer. It echoed in his ears, following him as he turned to leave. He ran. For days after, the whisper haunted his dreams. He would wake in the dark, hearing Eleanor's voice calling from beneath his floorboards, the walls, the very earth beneath his feet. Each night it grew stronger, more urgent. It wasn't just a call, it was a plea. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Thomas returned to the graveyard, this time during the day. He searched the records at the local library and discovered Eleanor was a child who had vanished without a trace more than a century ago. Never found, never mourned properly. The grave was a marker set by a grieving stranger who had stumbled upon the woods long after her disappearance. He realized the whisper was more than a ghostly remnant. It was a tether, a fragment of a soul caught between worlds, bound to the forgotten graveyard and forgotten by time. That night, Thomas went back once more, flashlight in hand but steady now, heart braced for what might come. He knelt at Eleanor's stone and spoke softly, promising to remember her, to tell her story, to bring her name back from the shadows. The whisper returned, but this time it was different. It was calm, almost relieved. The fog lifted slightly, and the oppressive weight eased. And then silence. Thomas left the graveyard, the whisper fading behind him, but the echo remained in his mind, a reminder that some voices refused to be silenced, even in the dead of night. From that night onward, whenever the wind rustles through the trees near the forgotten graveyard, some say they can still hear a soft whisper calling out, not for help anymore, but for remembrance. The night wrapped the city in a thick, suffocating blanket of darkness. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that danced with every gust of wind. The alleys, narrow and grimy, held their secrets tightly, swallowing the footsteps of anyone who dared venture too close. Tonight, one alley in particular held something far darker than the usual grime and decay, something that waited, silent and patient. It began with a feeling, an inexplicable unease creeping up the spine like icy fingers brushing just beneath the skin. At first, it was dismissed as the usual paranoia that night brings, the brain's way of tricking the senses when alone and vulnerable. But the feeling grew heavier, more insistent. Presence. Watching. Walking home after a late shift. The clatter of shoes against the pavement echoed louder than usual, swallowed quickly by the stillness around. The alley loomed ahead, a shortcut that many avoided, but for some, time or necessity left no choice. The watcher waited in that narrowing space where light failed to reach, eyes unseen but piercing through the darkness like a predator locked on its prey. Every step forward was met with a growing sense of being observed. Every glance backward revealed only empty darkness. The silence was punctuated only by distant city sounds, the faint hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a stray dog. But within the alley itself, no sound escaped, as if the air itself held its breath. At the edge of the alley, the walls pressed close, the bricks slick with moisture and age. It felt like walking into a trap, but there was no turning back. The watcher's presence felt closer now, a weight pressing into the back of the mind. It wasn't just observation anymore. It was something waiting to be noticed. A sudden flicker of movement caught the eye, a shadow darting just beyond the range of the dim street lamp's glow. The heart stuttered, the body frozen for a moment, trapped in the split second between flight and curiosity. Then, a low, barely audible whisper curled through the air, indistinct but unmistakably there. Words lost to comprehension, but spoken with intent, calling, beckoning. The watcher did not reveal itself fully. Instead, it toyed with perception. Shapes twisted in the peripheral vision. The alley's angles seemed to shift impossibly, elongating and contracting, like a living thing breathing in the dark. It was a test, a game played by something ancient and patient, lurking just beyond human understanding. Steps quickened, breath shallow, the rhythm of escape frantic but never quite fast enough. Every footfall echoed, but something else followed. A second rhythm, slower and heavier, not quite matching, but close enough to spark panic. Turning suddenly, nothing but shadow met the gaze. Yet the sensation remained. Cold, malevolent, and unyielding. The walls seemed to close in as the watcher's gaze pressed harder, a weight on the soul that sapped strength and hope. The shadows moved with a will of their own, creeping along the brickwork, stretching out tendrils of darkness that reached hungrily, seeking to envelop. A chill settled deep into the bones, a warning that escape might not be as simple as the legs promised. Fingers brushed against the damp surface of the alley wall, grasping for reality, for something solid to hold on to, but the surface seemed to ripple like water under the touch. The watcher's presence was not bound by physical form. It was a shadow given life, a fragment of fear made flesh. It thrived in the dead spaces where light did not penetrate, feeding on dread and isolation. The faint glow of the street lamp at the alley's mouth was a promise of safety, but reaching it felt like swimming upstream against an invisible current. The watcher's influence stretched outward, an invisible web tightening with each step. Behind, the silence was now broken by a low, rasping breath. Not the breath of the one fleeing, but something else, something that didn't belong to the living. Eyes darted frantically, searching for an exit, a crack in the darkness to slip through. But the alley seemed endless, a corridor without end, a trap closing silently. The watcher's patience was infinite. It had all the time in the world to wait, to stalk, to claim. Suddenly, the whispering voice returned, louder now, clearer but still unintelligible. It wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration felt in the chest, a cold pulse that shook the core of the being standing alone in the dead of night. The watcher's call was a siren song, promising release or ruin, an invitation that could not be ignored. Hands clenched into fists, teeth gritted against the rising tide of terror. Every instinct screamed to run, to flee, to disappear into the safety of the known world beyond. But something deeper held fast, a curiosity rooted in survival, to understand the watcher, to unravel the darkness that clung like a second skin. In the blink of an eye, the alley was empty. No sign of pursuit, no shadow lurking just beyond sight. The watcher had retreated, withdrawing into the folds of night, leaving behind only the memory of its gaze, an imprint etched deep into the mind's eye. But the feeling remained, a constant pulse beneath the surface, a reminder that some shadows never fade, some watchers never rest, that in the quiet hours when the world sleeps, something waits, always watching. And if you listen closely, if you dare to walk the forgotten paths where light fails, you might just catch its gaze. Waiting, watching, patient. The house was old, creaking with every gust of wind that slipped through the cracks. For years, it had stood empty, whispers of its past lingering like dust in the corners. When Clara bought it, she thought the price was a steal, too good to pass up. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. But she had plans. She would fix it up, make it her home. The first night was uneventful. The soft groans of the house settling, the occasional rustle of the trees outside. But as the nights went on, the quiet began to unravel. It started with a faint noise, a sound so low and distant, it could easily be mistaken for the house breathing. Beneath the floorboards, Clara thought, as she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She told herself it was just the wind or maybe the pipes. Old houses had their quirks, after all. But then the sounds grew louder, more distinct. At first, it was just a whisper, almost like muffled voices talking in a language she couldn't understand. She pressed her ear to the wooden floor near the living room, and the whispers stopped instantly. But the silence felt heavier after that, like the house was holding its breath. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara was cleaning the floors when she noticed a loose board near the fireplace. She hesitated before prying it up, revealing a dark cavity beneath. The scent that rose was stale, earthy, and oddly metallic. She pulled back the board, revealing a narrow gap that seemed to go deep into the foundation. That night, the sounds changed. No longer just whispers, but something else, screams. Soft, agonizing screams, like someone trapped and desperate, barely audible but impossible to ignore. They echoed beneath her feet, pressing into her mind, clawing at her calm. Sleep became impossible. The screams would start just after midnight, sometimes early in the evening, sometimes later. Clara found herself pacing the house, trying to pinpoint their source. The walls, the basement, even the attic, but always it came from beneath the floorboards. Desperation settled in. She called a local contractor to inspect the foundation. The man arrived, a grizzled veteran with years of experience. He frowned when Clara showed him the loose board. "This house is old, sure, but there's nothing down here that shouldn't be." He tapped the floor, and the screams began again. Faint, but unmistakable. "Sounds like rats or something," he said, though the tremble in his voice betrayed doubt. Clara spent the next day researching the house's history. Old newspapers, town records, anything she could find. It was then she discovered the house was built on the site of a forgotten boarding house. Decades ago, a fire had swept through the building, trapping several people inside. Some never escaped. Their bodies were never found. Just charred remains swept away by the flames, or so the records said. The screams beneath the floorboards made a dreadful kind of sense. That night, Clara lay in bed, heart pounding as the first scream rose up from below. She forced herself to listen, the sound racking her nerves with its raw desperation. It was as if someone was begging for help, pleading to be heard. The next morning, she decided to confront it head-on. She gathered tools and began tearing up the floorboards near the fireplace. The air grew colder, heavier, as the cavity widened. The darkness beneath was endless, swallowing her flashlight beam. Suddenly, a cold gust swept through the room. The screams erupted, louder and more urgent than before. A pressure filled the space, like a weight pressing down on her chest. Clara's hands trembled as she reached deeper into the hole. Her fingers brushed something soft, cloth, brittle and torn. Pulling it free, she uncovered a small bundle wrapped in decayed fabric. Her breath caught. Inside was a faded journal, its pages brittle but intact. As she flipped through it, the words of a terrified woman emerged. The journal told of a fire, chaos, and a desperate attempt to hide her children beneath the floorboards. The screams, Clara realized with a chill, were the echoes of that desperate mother's fear, trapped forever in the foundation. But the journal didn't end there. The final entries spoke of a curse, a binding of souls to the house itself. The mother's anguish had never left. It had festered, growing into something darker, something that needed release. That night, the screams were different. Not just fear or pain, but anger. The house shuddered under their weight. Clara knew she couldn't leave it be. She burned the journal in the fireplace, hoping to break whatever tie held the souls beneath her home. For a moment, silence. Then a final, heart-wrenching scream, longer, more pained than any before. After that, the house fell quiet. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, and the night is impossibly still, faint whispers drift through the floorboards, reminding Clara that some cries never truly fade away. The cold hand on the shoulder came without warning. a sudden weight pressing down in the silence of the night. It wasn't the kind of cold you expect in a winter breeze or an open window. This was a deep, unnatural chill, one that crawled beneath the skin and seeped into the bones. It was the kind of cold that whispered of something watching, waiting, lingering just out of sight. She was alone in the apartment, like every other night, the dim glow of her bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The city outside hummed softly, but inside, everything felt heavy, the air thick with a tension she couldn't shake. She had told herself it was just nerves. Maybe the late night alone, the silence, or the exhaustion from a long day. But then the cold hand rested on her shoulder, and all reason fled. Her breath hitched, heart pounding a frantic rhythm that echoed in her ears. Slowly, she turned, careful not to startle whatever presence she sensed. The room was empty, as if the hand had never been there. But the feeling lingered, sharp and undeniable, a silent reminder that she was not truly alone. The sensation wasn't new. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed small things, subtle disturbances that no one else seemed to see. The soft tapping at the window when the rain was silent outside. The fleeting glimpse of a shadow that didn't match the shapes of her furniture. Whispers too quiet to catch words but loud enough to unsettle her in the dead of night. Her friends dismissed it. Stress, they said. Just your imagination. But the cold hand, that unmistakable pressure, felt different. Real. And it was growing bolder. One evening, after a long day at work, she sat curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone to distract herself. The apartment was dark save for the faint glow of the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. Suddenly, the air turned icy. She shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders, then felt it again. A ghostly touch on the back of her neck, light as a feather but cold enough to freeze the blood. Her skin prickled with dread as the hairs on the back of her neck stood at attention. She wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Her eyes darted wildly, searching the dim corners of the room, but nothing moved. No figure, no shadow, just silence thick and suffocating. The days that followed became a blur of restless nights and haunted mornings. The cold hand returned again and again, in the kitchen while she washed dishes, in the hallway as she reached for the light switch, even in the shower where steam fogged the glass but could not mask the presence pressing just behind her. Each time it came, it left her shaken, more fragile. Sleep became impossible. She dreaded closing her eyes, fearing the moment when the chill would find her again, slow and deliberate, like an invisible predator stalking its prey. One night, desperation led her to set up a small camera in the bedroom, hoping to capture proof of what she could no longer deny. The footage was subtle, a faint blur moving in the corner of the frame, a shadow shifting against the wall, and then the unmistakable moment when the cold hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Watching the playback, she saw the pressure distort the fabric of her shirt, the way her hair shifted as if caught in a sudden breeze, though the room was still. There was no explanation, no trick of the light. Something unseen was there, tangible enough to touch, cold enough to chill. She tried researching, diving into folklore and urban legends, desperate for answers. Stories of restless spirits, lingering regrets, and entities bound by grief. A common thread emerged. The cold hand was often described as a sign, a warning, or a desperate attempt at communication from something trapped between worlds. The question that haunted her most was why her? Why now? Then the dreams began, vivid, unsettling glimpses into a past she never knew. She saw a figure cloaked in shadows, reaching out across a void, their hand icy and outstretched. She heard whispers of names, places, and promises broken long ago. A tragedy buried beneath years of silence, calling out through time. The dreams left her breathless, torn between fear and a strange sense of empathy. The cold hand was no longer just a source of terror. It was a message, a plea. One evening, driven by a mix of fear and resolve, she lit a single candle and spoke aloud into the darkness. "Who are you? What do you want?" The room seemed to inhale, the flame flickering wildly as a chill swept through the air. Then, softly, a voice, barely more than a breath, whispered her name. Frozen, she waited, heart hammering, as the cold hand settled once again on her shoulder. But this time, it lingered, gentle and hesitant, like a touch from someone unsure if they were welcome. The boundary between fear and understanding blurred. In that fragile moment, she realized the cold hand was not meant to harm, but to connect, to reach out from the shadows, seeking recognition, release, or perhaps forgiveness. Days passed, and though the hand still came, the terror softened. It became a quiet companion in the lonely hours, a reminder of something beyond her comprehension. A presence tethered to her existence, waiting for a resolution that only she could offer. And in the deep silence of the night, when the world held its breath, she listened, to the cold hand on her shoulder, to the stories whispered through the chill, and to the shadows that finally felt less like threats and more like echoes of a forgotten past. The car was silent except for the faint hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of the night wind brushing against the trees. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, dark and empty, lit only by the dull glow of distant streetlights. A single traveler made her way home after a late-night shift, eyes tired but alert, fingers gripping the steering wheel with quiet determination. She had taken this route many times before, the long, lonely road winding through the outskirts of town. Normally, it offered comfort in its familiarity, but tonight something felt off, the kind of unease that sinks deep into the bones, unshakable and cold. It started with a feeling, the kind that creeps up the spine when you're sure someone's watching, but when you glance in the rearview mirror, all you see is the empty road behind you. A glance to the passenger side revealed nothing but the seat, vacant, undisturbed. The air inside the car suddenly felt thick, heavy, as if it had been filled with an unseen presence. The faint scent of something metallic lingered, a trace too subtle to be noticed at first, but growing stronger with every mile. Her thoughts raced. Was it fatigue? A trick of the mind? She shook her head and focused on the road, trying to dismiss the feeling as paranoia. But then, a soft sound echoed inside the cabin. A breath. Not hers. A breath drawn slow and deliberate, close enough to be felt, but no one was there. The passenger seat belt, still unbuckled, twitched slightly, as if brushed by an invisible hand. Her heart pounded, hands tightening around the wheel. She glanced sideways again. Still empty. Her breathing grew shallow. The radio crackled, static filling the silence before a faint whisper seemed to crawl out from the speakers, low and fragmented. Words she couldn't quite make out, but chilling enough to freeze her blood. She flicked the radio off, but the whisper didn't stop. It seemed to seep into the air itself. The road twisted sharply ahead, a dark forest looming on both sides. The trees swayed, casting long, shifting shadows that reached into the car. Through the corner of her eye, a fleeting shape passed across the window, a silhouette that vanished when she looked directly. She tried to speed up, the tires gripping the asphalt desperately, but the feeling grew heavier, an oppressive weight sitting just beside her. The invisible passenger was there, watching, waiting. The temperature dropped suddenly. Her breath came out in visible clouds, though the heater was on full blast. The rearview mirror fogged, but when she wiped it clean, faint handprints smudged the glass, appearing as if pressed by ghostly fingers. Panic edged in. She tried calling her husband, but the phone had no signal. No bars, just silence. The headlights flickered, then went out for a brief moment, plunging her into total darkness. When they blinked back on, the road ahead was empty, but the seat beside her was now warm. The feeling of cold presence shifted into something closer. She could sense the shape moving, a breath on her neck, a whisper in her ear. The voice was clearer now, low and urgent. "Don't look!" Her instincts screamed to glance over, but she kept her eyes fixed on the road. A flash of movement in the corner of her vision, dark, blurred, just beyond the edge of sight. Something was sitting there, unseen but undeniably real. Her hands trembled, the wheel barely steady. The car took a sharp curve, tires screeching, and the headlights caught a glimpse of a pale face, hollow eyes staring back from the darkness of the passenger seat. When she blinked, it was gone. The road opened into a stretch with no trees, under a sky empty of stars. The sense of dread did not fade. Instead, it deepened, a heavy pressure pressing down from the unseen occupant. Suddenly, the car slowed on its own, the accelerator unresponsive. She tried to push the pedal, but the car was trapped in an invisible grip. The presence leaned in closer, colder now. A breath tickled her ear, speaking just one word. "Remember," she gasped, a memory flooding in. Not her own, but someone else's. A late night, a desperate escape, a crash. Screams swallowed by silence. The unseen passenger was a remnant of that past, trapped between worlds, hitching a ride home. Her heart pounded with rising terror and pity. This was no random haunt. It was a soul clinging to the edge, asking for help, or perhaps warning. The car jerked violently as the engine sputtered, then roared back to life. The presence recoiled, the cold evaporating like mist. The passenger seat belt snapped tight on its own and then released, as if the entity had finally let go. The radio flickered back on, this time clear, playing a soft, melancholic tune. The road ahead was empty and quiet once more. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of her driveway. Stepping out, she looked back once. The empty passenger seat gleamed under the streetlight, as ordinary as it had always been. But she knew the unseen passenger had ridden with her. And somewhere, in the depths of the night, it was still waiting for the next traveler to share its secret. The fog rolled in thick and slow that night, swallowing the edges of the town like a living thing. It crept through alleyways and over fences, seeping under doors and through cracked windows. It wasn't the kind of fog anyone in the quiet town had ever seen before. Too dense, too cold, and oddly silent. It didn't carry the usual damp smell, but instead had a faint metallic scent, like iron and old blood. People noticed the change as soon as the sun dipped below the horizon. The streetlights flickered weakly, struggling against the gray tide that pressed down on everything. Phones lost signal. Cars stalled inexplicably. Dogs barked wildly, then fell silent. Anna was one of the few who didn't panic immediately. She had grown up in this town, knew its rhythms, and trusted its quiet nights. But as the fog slithered through the cracks of her small apartment, something deep inside told her to lock every door and window tight. That's when the whispers started. At first, they were so soft, barely audible over the hum of the city's night. She thought it was the wind, the fog playing tricks on her mind. But then the words became clearer, unmistakable in their chilling clarity. They weren't spoken in any language she knew. The voices were layered, hundreds of them, overlapping, repeating, a low, rasping chorus that seemed to crawl beneath her skin. She tried to turn on the lights, but the bulbs fizzled and popped. The power went out completely, plunging her into darkness. Her breath fogged in the cold air as she fumbled for her phone. No signal, no service. Her heart thudding, she edged to the window and peered out. The street was nothing but swirling gray. Shapes moved in the fog, shadowy figures that appeared and disappeared just beyond the veil. No one else was out. The fog had swallowed the town whole. The whispers grew louder, now unmistakably beckoning her. They seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around her like chains. Panic rising, she covered her ears, but the voices found their way through her fingers, burrowing into her thoughts. Memories she didn't have surfaced, fragments of places she never visited, faces she never met. A feeling of watching and waiting, of being drawn somewhere deeper into the fog. Desperate, Anna grabbed her coat and a flashlight, stepping out into the night despite the cold that bit at her skin. The fog enveloped her instantly, dampening sound and swallowing the beam of her light. Every step felt heavier, as if the fog resisted her movement. The whispers followed, circling, echoing. Ahead, a dim glow pulsed faintly, like a beacon calling her deeper. Shapes emerged, elongated and shifting, like shadows stretched by some unseen fire. They didn't speak, but their presence pressed on her mind, filling it with dread and fascination. She stumbled forward, heart racing, until she found herself at the edge of the old marshland, a place long abandoned, avoided even by locals. The fog here was thickest, clinging to the waterlogged ground and rising like smoke from the earth. From the center of the marsh, a figure stood, a woman in a tattered white dress, her face pale and blurred by the mist. She raised a hand slowly, beckoning Anna closer. The whispers shifted into a singular voice, soft, melodic, but laced with sorrow. "Come," it said. "Come with me." Anna felt the pull stronger than anything she had ever known. Every instinct screamed to run, but her feet moved forward, sinking into the cold mud. The woman's eyes held a depth of endless grief, a loneliness that stretched beyond time. Suddenly, the ground beneath Anna gave way. She fell into freezing water, the fog swallowing her whole. The whispers turned frantic, overlapping in a rush of sound that drowned out all else. Panic surged as she fought to surface, but the water was endless, the cold absolute. Just as her vision dimmed and the weight pressed down, a hand grabbed hers, solid, warm. Pulling her up, the fog began to thin, and the night sounds returned. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of leaves. Anna gasped, shivering, clinging to the figure who had saved her. Behind her, the fog rolled back, retreating like a tide. The whispers faded into silence, leaving only the quiet night. But Anna knew the fog would return. It was waiting, watching, and next time it might not let go. Late at night, when the world falls silent and the only sound is the faint hum of the house settling, some noises shouldn't be ignored. In the kind of stillness where every small creak becomes amplified, one sound stood out above all others, voices coming from the vent. It began with a soft murmur, barely noticeable at first. She had just moved into the old apartment downtown, a modest space, perfect for starting fresh after the chaos of the last year. The building was old, creaky, but the rent was affordable and it had charm. The walls whispered their own secrets, but she told herself it was just the pipes, just the wind. But then came the voices. It started one evening around midnight. She was in bed, the moon casting pale light through the cracked blinds. First, she thought it was the neighbors. Maybe someone talking late, a muffled conversation traveling through the thin walls. But the voices weren't distant or muffled. They were coming through the metal vent directly above her bed. A soft, breathy whisper, so low it was almost a vibration. She froze, heart hammering. No one else was home. She checked every room. Empty. The apartment was hers alone. For nights after, the whispers returned. Not words she could understand. Just murmurs. Sometimes a sigh, sometimes a low laugh, like children playing a game in a place they shouldn't be. The voices seemed to follow her, as if they knew her routine, her habits. She started recording the sounds on her phone, desperate for proof, something to explain it away. Listening back, it wasn't just random noise. There were patterns, a rhythmic cadence, like someone calling her name, barely audible but unmistakable. Her sleep became restless. Dreams twisted into nightmares. A dark figure lurking just beyond her sight, always near the vent. Sometimes, in her dreams, she felt cold breath on her neck, heard whispers warning her to leave. She confided in a friend, who suggested the vents might be connected to old, unused rooms in the building's basement, spaces forgotten or sealed off years ago. Maybe the voices were echoes, trapped in the ventilation system, like trapped souls. Curiosity pushed her to investigate. One afternoon, armed with a flashlight, she climbed into the narrow crawl space above the ceiling to peer into the vents. The metal tubes stretched endlessly, twisting through the building like a maze. The air smelled stale, old, and faintly metallic. As she shone her light down the vent, a sudden chilling gust blew out, and faint whispers floated back to her ears. She pulled back, heart racing. That night, the voices changed. No longer soft murmurs. They became insistent. Snippets of words. Come. Help me. Don't trust. Her phone lost signal. Lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. One night, she woke to the sound of scratching, nails scraping against the vent cover. She grabbed her phone to record again. The scratches grew louder, frantic, desperate. The whispering voices swelled, overlapping, urgent. She called the landlord, who reluctantly admitted that the building once had a mysterious fire in the basement decades ago. Several people went missing after that fire, their bodies never found. The basement was sealed, vent lines rerouted, but maybe something was still down there. Determined to end the haunting, she enlisted a group of friends to explore the sealed basement the next day. They found the old vent shafts and peeled back the rusty grates. The air inside was cold, stale. Deep inside, scratched into the metal, were words, "Trapped, leave us," and a chilling tally of dates, years ago, all corresponding to the missing persons. As they explored, strange sounds echoed, faint voices calling from deep within the walls, the vent shafts seeming to pulse with unseen energy. Her flashlight flickered, and for a moment, she thought she saw a shadowy figure staring back. After they left, the voices never returned. But the vent grate was found slightly ajar the next morning. No one could explain it, but the whispers in the vent had been real, a chilling reminder that some places hold the voices of those who never escaped the night. They say light keeps the dark away, but what if the light itself is the last thing you see before the dark truly begins? The old house at the end of Harrow's Lane had long been abandoned. Rumors whispered among the locals said it was cursed, that every tenant left in haste, never to return. But none of those stories ever explained the strange power the house held over the night. It started the evening Emma moved in. She was a young artist, eager to find solitude and inspiration away from the city's noise. The landlord warned her about the flickering light in the living room, but Emma laughed it off. Old wiring, she told herself, plugging in a lamp near the window. That night, as the wind howled outside and shadows danced along the cracked walls, the light in the living room began to flicker. At first, it was subtle, a gentle dimming, as if the bulb was gasping for breath. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, sketching, trying to ignore the irregular glow. But then it happened. The light didn't just flicker, it pulsed, as though it had a heartbeat. A slow, deliberate rhythm, matching her own pulse. The edges of the room blurred in and out of sharpness, the shadows stretching unnaturally. Emma blinked and looked around. The lamp's glow seemed to thin, retreating, leaving the corners darker than before. She reached out, as if to steady the lamp, but the moment her fingers brushed the switch, the light snapped off completely. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then, just as Emma's eyes adjusted, the lamp flickered back on. But not as before. The bulb glowed a dull, sickly orange, casting long shadows that didn't match the furniture or the shape of the room. She shook her head and stood up, heart hammering. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the old house was just playing tricks on her mind. The next morning, Emma found no sign of the lamp's malfunction. The bulb shone bright and steady, the same as any other lamp in any other home. She dismissed the night's events, attributing them to her imagination. But the flickering returned each night after that, always at the same time, midnight. It began as a warning, a brief pulse before the light gave out completely. Each time, the darkness grew thicker, heavier, pressing in on Emma like a physical weight. She started noticing things in the shadows, subtle movements at the edge of her vision. A figure standing just out of focus. A whispering voice that vanished whenever she tried to listen closely. At first, Emma convinced herself it was the stress of moving and living alone. She stopped staying up late, avoided the flickering lamp, and covered mirrors with cloth. But none of it helped. One night, as the clock struck midnight, the light flickered again. But this time it didn't just go out. It dimmed slowly, the dull orange glow fading into blackness. But the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Emma froze, breath caught in her throat. From the deepest shadows, something began to emerge, shapes, textures, a whisper of breath on the back of her neck. She wanted to scream but found her voice gone, her limbs heavy as if submerged underwater. The darkness pulled at her skin like tendrils. Suddenly, the light flickered once more, casting a brief glow, and in that moment, Emma saw it clearly. A figure stood in the corner, tall, thin, its face hidden beneath a mass of shadows, but its eyes glowing faintly with the same sickly orange light as the flickering bulb. Emma's heart slammed against her ribs as the figure raised a hand, pointing at her. The air around her thickened, and a coldness seeped into her bones, deeper than any winter chill. The light died. When it returned, the figure was gone. But Emma wasn't. Over the following days, she noticed her reflection in the mirror was not quite right. A flicker in her eyes, like the bulb's pulse, as if the shadowed figure's essence had somehow seeped inside her. Sleep became impossible. Every night, when the clock struck midnight, she felt the darkness close and tighter, the flickering light like a countdown to something inevitable. Desperation drove Emma to research the house's history. She discovered that long ago, a previous tenant had vanished without a trace. Others had fled in terror, speaking of a light that breathes and eyes in the dark. The stories hinted at an ancient curse tied to the lamp itself, an object never replaced or repaired, like it was alive and feeding on fear and light. Determined to break free, Emma unplugged the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, deeper than any night she had ever known. But the oppressive silence was soon broken by the faintest flicker, the light somehow still alive in the absence of power. And in that darkness, the figure appeared again. Closer this time, its glowing eyes boring into Emma's soul. She screamed, clutching her ears as the light pulsed in her mind, a sickening rhythm that made her head spin. The shadows whispered secrets, promises of release and of eternal night. Emma realized then that the flickering light wasn't just a warning or a trick. It was a gateway, a tether between the living world and the darkness beyond. And every flicker was a step closer to being pulled through. On the final night, Emma sat in the center of the room, the unplugged lamp before her. The clock approached midnight. The light flickered. Pulse, pulse, pulse. The room twisted and stretched. The figure reached out. The bulb glowed its last flicker, a terrible burning orange, before plunging Emma into a darkness so complete it swallowed sound, space, and time itself. And somewhere, in the silence, the last light flickered once more. It started as a creaking sound at 3:12 a.m. sharp, rhythmic, and deliberate. The kind of creak that didn't come from wind or house settling, but something moving beneath the floorboards. Paige had never noticed the basement door before. It blended into the hallway so well that even after 3 years of living there, she'd walked past it daily without registering its presence. The house was old, built in 1919. Her landlord had once mentioned something about it being closed off for renovations that never finished. No one had gone down there since the 70s. That's what made it strange when she found it slightly ajar one night, about 2 inches open, just enough to see darkness and feel cool, unmoving air drift out. There was no handle, only an old iron keyhole embedded in the wood. When she pressed her ear to the door, she could swear she heard breathing. Not heavy, not obvious, just soft, measured, like something asleep on the other side, careful not to be noticed. She tried to laugh it off. Maybe the door warped. Maybe it was just a draft. But the next night it opened wider. For inches. Still no handle. Still no stairs visible inside. Just black. She placed a towel against the bottom gap to block out the air and shoved a heavy bookshelf in front of it, just in case. The creaking resumed at 3:12 a.m. Only this time the bookshelf had been moved. Not toppled, not dragged, just shifted cleanly to the side, as though someone needed access. And the towel? Folded and placed neatly at her feet. That was when Paige called the landlord. Straight to voicemail. She emailed. Nothing. She even drove to the listed office the next morning. Vacant for months. No forwarding address. No contact. The door became her obsession. She began setting up small tests, placing salt lines, flour on the floor, a baby monitor in the hallway. Night after night, the flour would be disturbed by something small, like fingertips had traced symbols into it. Symbols she didn't recognize. The salt lines would be swept aside, and the baby monitor? Dead silence until exactly 3:12 a.m. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in English. It didn't even sound human. A dry, rattling voice that hissed out syllables like it had never learned how to speak. She played the audio back, slowed it down, reversed it, still unintelligible. But it never stopped. Each night, 3:12 a.m. sharp, the door would shift open a little more. 7 inches, then 10, then 12. One night, she decided to stay up and watch it, just to prove it wasn't her imagination. She sat in the hallway with a flashlight, phone recording, waiting. At exactly 3:12, the hallway light flickered once. Then darkness. Her flashlight refused to turn on. Her phone died. Every device dead. And then she heard it, the slow, wooden creak of the door opening further. But this time it wasn't just air escaping. It was a sound that made her stomach drop. A dragging noise, like something pulling itself across stone. Heavy, wet. Paige bolted back into her room, locked the door, and didn't sleep. When morning came, she checked her hallway camera. The footage was there, but the screen was pitch black from 3:12 to 3:24 a.m. When it returned, the door was wide open. A smell began to permeate the house. Damp, decay, old stone and soil, the kind of scent found in places untouched by light. She called contractors, trying to get someone to come seal the basement. But when they arrived, they found no door at all. Just smooth, unbroken wall. She showed them the footage, nothing. No record of it. Even the files she swore she saved were now corrupted. The door was still there, though. She could see it, touch it, smell the cold that leaked from its seams. But no one else could. And that's when the dreams started. Each night, she'd find herself at the top of a stone staircase, peering into the black abyss below. Something whispered from the depths, calling her name in a voice she almost recognized. Her mother's, perhaps, or someone long gone. The dreams would end with her standing at the threshold, 1 foot on the first step. She woke each morning with dirt under her nails. Then, one night, she woke on the hallway floor, directly in front of the open door. It gaped impossibly wide now, far wider than the house should allow. The space behind it was massive, lined with walls of rotting books and damp stone. She scrambled backward and slammed it shut. For the first time, it clicked, locked from the outside. But it never stayed closed for long. Her friend Jenna agreed to stay over. A skeptic, someone who didn't believe in the supernatural. That night, they both slept in Paige's room with cameras running. At 3:12 a.m., Paige jolted awake to the sound of Jenna screaming. Jenna was gone. The camera footage showed her walking calmly down the hallway, smiling, eyes glassy. She opened the door, stepped inside, and disappeared into the dark. No trace, no footprints, just silence. Paige filed a missing persons report, but without evidence. The police suspected she left on her own. Days passed, then weeks. On the 21st day, Paige received a package with no return address. Inside was a cassette tape and a note that simply read, "You left it open." The audio contained only one thing, Jenna's voice, whispering from deep underground, "Don't come down here. It's awake now." Paige moved out that same day, but the final horror came during her last inspection. As she passed the hallway, she saw it. The door, sealed in the wall again, flush and invisible. But this time, a faint knocking echoed from the other side, 3 slow knocks. And then, something whispered her name from beneath the floorboards. It was Jenna's voice. The neighborhood wasn't used to visitors after midnight, especially not in the colder months when the streets were empty and the air hung still. So when the front porch camera caught movement at 12:17 a.m., it felt off. The timestamp flickered, the footage distorted for a brief moment, but the frame froze on one figure, standing perfectly still under the porch light. He wore a gray hoodie, pulled tightly over his head. His face, though partially obscured, was wrong. Too smooth, no obvious features, just the hint of where eyes should be. No one in the house had heard a knock. The doorbell hadn't rung. The figure simply stood there. Lena, who lived alone, woke up inexplicably at that same moment. Not from a sound, not from a nightmare, just a jolt of consciousness, like her body knew something her mind didn't. Her phone buzzed with a motion alert from the porch camera. She opened it and froze. The figure was still standing there, unmoving, hands at his sides. A full minute passed. Then, without warning, the feed cut to black. No disconnection, just static. She locked her bedroom door, though every door in the house had already been locked hours before. She stayed awake until sunrise. By morning, the footage was gone. The app still had the notification, but the video had been wiped. Not deleted, erased. 3 nights later, he came again. 12:17 a.m. Same figure, same position, same stillness. This time, he turned slowly to face the camera directly. It shouldn't have been possible to feel stared at through a screen, but Lena felt it deep in her spine. She called the police. They arrived 13 minutes later. The figure was gone. No footprints in the frost on the porch. Nothing disturbed. One officer checked the footage and saw nothing but empty porch light. Lena insisted, showed them the motion alert, even tried retrieving the old clip. But again, it had vanished. The officers gave her a careful look. Maybe she was dreaming. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was stress. But the dreams started that same night. Dreams that didn't feel like dreams. Lena would wake up standing at her front door, hand on the knob, heart pounding. The door never opened. Not yet. The next night, she found herself outside. No memory of unlocking the door. No memory of walking barefoot onto the porch. But there she was, skin cold, eyes wide, the street behind her empty. She rushed back inside, bolted the door, and stayed in the corner of her living room until morning light spilled through the windows. When she checked the porch cam after sunrise, it played a new clip. She stood there on the porch, motionless, eyes wide open, facing the door. Behind her, just barely visible at the edge of the frame, was the stranger, standing on the sidewalk, watching, closer now. The camera glitched again. Static, then a brief flicker of black before returning to normal. That night, she unplugged the camera completely. Her friend Eric offered to stay the night after she told him everything. Not because he believed her, but because he didn't want her alone if something was actually wrong. They stayed up watching movies. Midnight passed. Nothing happened. Until the power went out. A sharp click, then darkness. The house hummed with silence. Eric got up to check the fuse box. Lena stayed frozen on the couch. The quiet wasn't normal. It was the kind that swallowed sound. Then she heard it. Not a knock. Not footsteps. Breathing. Just behind her ear. Slow. Wet. Too close. She turned around. No one there. Eric called from the hallway. Lights flickered back on. He found nothing in the fuse box. No reason for the outage. The next morning he left. Said nothing. Just packed up and left quickly, mumbling about not being able to sleep. That evening, Lena received a voicemail from an unknown number, static for 5 seconds. Then Eric's voice, "Don't open the door. I saw it. You'll want to. Don't. It's not him." She hadn't told Eric about the dreams, about the knocking she began hearing just before waking. About the voice outside the door that started sounding like her father. Her father who had died 2 years ago. The voice grew clearer each night. More familiar. Pleading. "Lena, please. It's cold. Open the door." Always at 12:17 a.m. The last night began with silence. She sat on the floor by her front door, phone in one hand, a kitchen knife in the other. No lights. No sound, just waiting. Then the doorknob rattled. A soft knock, then a voice. It was her mother's voice this time. "Sweetheart, it's me. I need to come in." Her mother had been in a nursing home, hours away. Lena knew she was alive. She'd spoken to her that morning. But the voice outside the door was identical. Another knock, slower, heavier. "I'm hurt. Please open." Lena whispered. "No." The voice stopped. Silence stretched. Then came the final knock, different this time. It echoed deeper. Not on wood. On glass. She turned toward the hallway. The knock had come from the back door. She ran into her bedroom and locked herself in. The sound followed. First at the window. Then from the ceiling. Then behind the walls. The next morning, sunlight poured into the house. Everything was quiet again. She checked every door, locked, every window, untouched. But on the inside of the front door, a single word had been scratched into the wood. Soon, she moved out that week, left the city entirely, told no one where she went. But last night, at 12:17 a.m., her new phone buzzed. Motion detected on porch camera. A still figure stood at the door. No features, no sound, just watching. The midnight stranger had followed. It started with a call at 1:13 a.m. Maya had been awake, scrolling mindlessly through her phone in bed, half listening to the wind scratching against the apartment windows. Her phone lit up with an unknown number. No name, no location, just a number, 10 digits, the last four all threes. She almost ignored it, but curiosity pried her finger toward the screen. The second she answered, there was silence. Not the kind of silence you hear when someone hangs up, but the suffocating kind, where someone is there, breathing, waiting. "Hello?" she said softly. No response, only a faint sound, like paper folding or distant static. Then a whisper. "Maya." Her body stiffened. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, as if the person on the other end was confirming she had picked up. "Who is this?" Silence returned. Then the line disconnected. Maya sat in the dark for a while, staring at the ceiling. The heater clicked on, startling her. She told herself it was probably a prank. Wrong number, but the voice knew her name. Maybe it was someone from work. Maybe. The phone buzzed again. Same number. She declined the call. Seconds later, it buzzed again. This time, the call didn't even ring normally. Connected immediately. She hadn't pressed anything. The screen was black, but she could hear something breathing again, but this time closer, raspier, like someone was exhaling inches from the microphone. Then a whisper, fainter than before. "Why did you move the mirror?" Her heart caught in her throat. She had moved the mirror earlier that day, taken it off the hallway wall after it slipped its hook slightly. She hadn't told anyone, not even posted it online. Her pulse quickened. She hung up, blocked the number. A moment later, her phone restarted. She hadn't touched it. It flickered back on and rang again. No number this time. Just the word, unknown. Maya didn't answer. She turned her phone off, tossed it on the floor, and buried herself beneath her covers, trying to convince herself it was a tech glitch, maybe malware. She drifted into uneasy sleep. At 3:17 a.m., she woke up freezing. Her phone sat on her nightstand, powered on, though she'd left it off. The screen was glowing faintly, illuminating a missed call notification. 14 missed calls, all between 2:13 and 3:13 a.m., all from unknown. She sat up, heart pounding. Then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The mirror she had taken down, the full-length one from the hallway, was now leaning against the wall opposite her bed. She hadn't moved it there. Slowly, she crept toward it, every nerve in her body screaming. She reached out to touch it, but paused. In the reflection, the room looked normal. Bed, blanket, nightstand, but not her. Her reflection wasn't there. Instead, the surface shimmered faintly and showed something else. The hallway, empty. And then, slowly, as if emerging from the wall, a shape entered the hallway in the reflection. Tall, pale, motionless. Its face was obscured by shadow. It didn't walk. It simply appeared, like it was waiting, looking in. Maya stumbled backward. When she looked into the hallway behind her, it was empty. The reflection changed again. Now, the figure was standing in her bedroom, right where she had just been standing. But in the real world, the room remained empty. Her phone buzzed again. One new voicemail. She pressed play. A whisper, almost beneath hearing, Don't turn around. She froze. She didn't. She stayed still, heart hammering against her ribs, phone clutched in trembling hands. Then, a tap on the mirror. Deliberate. Sharp. She ran. She didn't even grab her coat. Just keys and shoes and out the door. Down the stairs. Into the street, breathing like her lungs were collapsing. She drove aimlessly, parking in a 24-hour diner lot and watching the rearview mirror, convinced something would appear behind her at any moment. When daylight came, she returned home. Everything was in place. The mirror was back in the hallway. Her phone had no new calls, no voicemails. She checked her call log. It was empty. No trace of the unknown number. She told her friend, Chloe, everything. Chloe laughed at first but noticed the panic in Maya's eyes. "You've been stressed," she said gently. Maybe it was a dream? But Maya knew it wasn't. Over the next few nights, nothing happened. Until the fourth night. She was brushing her teeth when she noticed it again. The mirror. Her reflection was delayed. Just slightly, maybe half a second. She waved. Her reflection followed half a second late. She backed away slowly, staring at it. Then it smiled. She wasn't smiling. She slammed the bathroom door and slept with the lights on. The next morning, the reflection seemed normal again. She tried everything. Removed the mirror. Covered it. Even threw it in the trash bin outside the building. But that night it was back. Propped against the hallway like it had never left. She stopped sleeping. Stopped answering calls. Until one day, she noticed something else. Every unknown number had the same last 4 digits. 3,333. Every voicemail ended at exactly 13 seconds. And in the background of each one, something new. A sound, something wet dragging across a floor. A low, animalistic growl. And always the same words whispered at the end. "I'm here." One day she called the number back. No ringtone. No busy signal. Just a click. Then a whisper. "Now I know where you are." She hung up, but the damage was done. That night, when she turned out the lights, the mirror shimmered again. And this time there were 2 figures in the reflection. One was her. The other wasn't. His head was tilted just slightly. His hands were too long. The smile too wide. And when she moved, it didn't. It stared. And smiled. And waited.